Thanks for that lovely introduction, Sapna. Good afternoon, friends. My name is Ramesh Nair, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. It's my pleasure and privilege to be moderating this session. Thank you, Sapna, again for welcoming all our expert panelists, all superstars, all hotshots of the industry. Always manage to get the best panelists whenever I've moderated any session with you, Sapna and team. So fantastic, great job. I'd like to welcome the audience to this panel. The topic is investing in distressed residential properties. Before I actually begin, Sapna, how many people have actually registered for this panel? It'd be good to know that.
We have had registrations on BW and on Realty Plus. So I think more than last we checked was more than 1,600 or something.
Oh, that's quite good. So the subject, obviously, on distressed residential real estate is quite timely, and it's the effort of Realty Plus to make sure the topics are timely and there are interesting speakers. So let's go ahead and get some thoughts from our opinion leaders from this panel. I'll start with you, Irfan. What's the current state of the residential market post the second wave? We saw some green shoots coming. Everyone was talking about things happening between around September and Jan, Feb, and again things went wrong. What's the real state today when we are in July of the residential market? And my question, all my questions are towards across the country. What's happening? Over to you, Irfan.
Hi, Ramesh. Pleasure being on this show, and especially nice talking to you. I think the pandemic and the after effects are seen most in contrasting the differences within the industry. So you have the headline items which have improved considerably, and you have the devil in the detail which has led to a greater misery amongst the developers. So without being poetic, I think it has increased the delight of the larger developers and has increased the plight of the smaller developers at the same time. Right? The market is even more segmented than before. And at the same time, you have cost increases. At the same time, you have difficulty in getting labor at the site. All of which is something that a larger developer, a branded developer, can take in a stride. But these are the straws that are breaking the bones of the backbones of some of the smaller developers. So I think the situation has worsened for a lot of the small developers, and I say this not from stats publicly available. I don't say this from perceptions. I'm talking of it from the reality as we see in our portfolio.
Thanks, Irfan. Amit, Bhagat, you want to add to that?
I think Irfan has summarized it very well. I must say that he has categorized the developers who's a beneficiary and who's suffering. But let us look at the recovery is also, as he rightly mentioned, the headline details are something, but the ground level realities are different. If you look at the start of the pandemic, Bangalore was the least impacted. Then because of stamp duty benefit, Maharashtra got the benefit between October to March. NCR, which was suffering for last 2 years, started recovering, and then the second wave came in. The industry needs a breather. The compounding of the debt and the interest is continuing and at a higher pace because every lender wants to exit a project, especially the non-bank finance companies, and they are pressurizing the developers to exit, sweeping most of the money through the escrows, and there is not adequate money left for execution. Collections are impacted. If you look even the top 11 listed developers collection details, you will notice that in the year of pandemic, they've not surpassed the previous year, most of them. Collections are impacted, lenders are sweeping, cost has increased, steel, cement, labor after the second wave. They have kept the labor on the site in the wave 1, wave 2. There is no relief to any developer. The larger developers, because they had the listed developer, because they had access to QIPs and bonds, they have been able to manage it. But sooner or later, if this continues and there is a third wave, and then I think the pressure will be felt everywhere. And I have seen some listed developers also not giving the desired results in the last 2 quarters. So I think it's a very tough time. Industry needs a breather and a relief.
Thanks, Amit. Sharad, you want to add to that?
Yeah, hi Ramesh, hi everyone. So I would agree in parts with both Irfan and Amit. I think I would look at this way, that when the pandemic started last year or the lockdown started, people were people didn't know how the things will play out. There was a uncertainty of unknown, the fear of unknown. And I think the headlines that we are reading around the green shoots and turnaround is in the context of what people were expecting that it might turn out to be. And the home sales and the kind of footfalls that we see in our site has really surprised us. I think what the expectation that it's going to turn around overnight or in a year's time, it's not going to happen. I believe the some bit of green shoot that we are seeing is if we are able to sustain it, maybe over a period of next 2 to 4 years, there could be some meaningful recovery. Two things one has to be very careful while announcing any kind of turnaround on green shoot. One of the biggest driver for this turnaround is interest rate. If I have to look at very closely, I would put at almost 50% weightage on the mortgage rates. And that brings in affordability. That also brings in a lot of consumer interest in buying properties. The second is there's this large part of these sales are getting cornered by top 30 developers of each of these markets. We may not like to say it, but I think for bottom 70% or bottom 80% developer, everything is challenging. Forget about capital. Capital is the biggest ingredient. I know of vendors who don't want to do business with some of these developers. Of course, the customers are making choices. So I think consolidation is going to accelerate. But I would say what has surprised me how quickly we have been able to reach to pre-COVID numbers. And I remain optimistic that things will it'll take time, but I think we are seeing recovery in pockets.
Thanks, Sharad. Ashwin, your opening thoughts?
Yeah, hi Ramesh, wonderful to talk to you, and hi everyone. See, I would like to break it up in two parts. From a demand side, what has happened is, and something that Sharad mentioned, mortgage rates are at all-time low. Savings have gone up because of the pandemic, especially the people who are on the salaried side. And there has been stamp duty, etc., that has happened from the government. So there are markets like Bangalore, Maharashtra, which is Bombay and Pune, which have done well. Now, my view is very different, because even if you're a large developer or a small developer, financiers who have funded developers not at the land stage are doing very well, because those developers intrinsically carry very good credit. Now, when you look at it from a financial standpoint and you start lending at 18 to 20%, and you're trying to inbuild risk of 4 to 5% just because it is a high risk funding, I have seen with my experience on the mortgage and developer finance side that the moment a financier in the last 4 to 5 years also, who has been taking funding on land, has not been able to recover because the margins have gone down. Obviously, there has been a pressure on the pricing. So it is not that the developers are not doing well. I know a lot of small developers who are doing extremely well in Pune, Bangalore, Mumbai, and these are not big developers. I would not like to take names, but they have been doing very well. They take construction finance at a rate anything between 11 to 13%, deliver on milestones. Consumers know these are the developers who have delivered earlier. Reference sales have increased a lot. Direct sales have increased a lot because the consumer has started evaluating the developer themselves by visiting the sites and understanding it, especially the second time buyer. So I think demand is good. There is a set of developers which have understood how to go about it and not boil the ocean, who are doing pretty well. And yes, there are developers who were struggling 5 years back. They are struggling more now because suddenly the consumer choice has become the differentiator. The consumer doesn't, this latest thing by RERA, where they are not allowing a developer from Noida to do new launches, is a shocker to many. But that's how it is all being driven from consumer insights, from consumer activism. So that's my brief on this, Ramesh.
Thanks, Ashwin. Amit Goenka, your views on where the residential market is right now?
So certainly, thank you, Ramesh, and pleasure to be on this esteemed panel. What we were certainly seen is that in the first wave, what happened really was that it was a new black swan event, for the entire global community, and therefore.
Amit, if you could come a little closer to the mic, because it's a little, the voice is a little.
Is this better now, Ramesh?
Much better, much better.
Okay. So just to reiterate, the first wave effectively being an unknown black swan event really provided a lot of cushioning for the economy as a whole through various interventions, both by the RBI, by the finance ministry, by various regulators, and so on and so forth, where a lot of SOPs, one-time restructuring, TLTRO, and a lot of mechanism and cash was infused into the economy, providing a lot of cushion, and therefore even covering some of the possibilities of mishap, failure, and stress that could have precipitated in the first wave. No such intervention really was seen in a wide scale during the second wave, which really led to a lot of exposure of the weaklings within the system, which were otherwise not being exposed to that measure in the first wave. So those who showed the deftness, the resolve, and the fundamentals to actually continue to weather the second wave, and also showed some amount of green shoots, because there was a lot of euphoria, as was mentioned earlier, between October to March on various counts post the unlock in the first wave. And those who actually made money or showed cash flows and resilience during that green shoot period were really the right candidates for receiving new capital. So, Ramesh, in the current times, I'm seeing that a lot of new capital is being pumped into the residential sector, both at greenfield, distressed, and brownfield levels. We're seeing new capital formations happening, new funds being raised, both global and domestic capital making a beeline for the India real estate again, basis the fundamentals that are now visible, seen in the past few quarters. And I do believe that is clearly intended for those boys, whether large-scale players, of course, there is no doubt that they will only continue to grow, and consolidation, which started effectively from 2016-17 onwards, which has now got accelerated in 2021, will certainly continue its journey. But even for those who are not part of that, and are possibly the tier 2, tier 3 players, will still continue to benefit from this new capital and the newfound resilience and demand from the marketplace. So I do believe there's a story also for them, and that's really where we participate, and that's where our capital is continue to find its money.
Thanks, Amit. Amit Bhagat, I'll come back to you again. What are some of the challenges today when capital providers like you? What are the kind of things you evaluate before looking at top up or refinancing, or when you're looking at a typically stressed residential projects? How do you look at it? You're one of the big capital providers in the country today. So how do you evaluate those challenges?
Thank you for terming us as big players, but I'll make an attempt. See, I think what we are looking at is the developer's credibility, intent, customer centricity, product delivery, track record of delivery, and eventually what is his capability to execute. These are the 5 things which I think when you partner with someone, you will look at it. And how has he rewarded other stakeholders? Once we are through with that, we look at whether this asset is in a growth corridor in the mid-segment space or affordable. Then you look at numbers. And then you look at whether it has to be refinanced. What we attempt to do is a financial closure of a project. Unless until there's a financial closure by refinancing and providing adequate working capital, and then the negative working capital cycle should play with the brand and customer receipts. I think that is the endeavor. The challenge comes if there are delays in the project, partly because of pandemic and also because the market was not very conducive from 17 to 19 actually. 17 to 19, 17 when the negative arbitrage was withdrawn in the income tax, the investors withdrew. And then the buyers also said, what is the urgency to buy, because the prices are either stable or going down. So while evaluating, RERA timelines are the most critical. Litigation, customer complaints is another point. And then because of insolvency, you have to look at it, whether the asset is in a separate SPV or not. Otherwise, if you are joining hands, we don't do mezzanine or second charge, but if you are at the holdco level, then the challenge is we don't know what skeleton will come out of the cupboard. And so RERA, structure, asset in a separate SPV, everything matters today. It's a kind of a checklist. 10. All tick boxes have to be there. if you want to go, unless until you have a privilege like Irfan and Swami Fund, where which has been a debate in the previous panel also, that yes, do we need that kind of a protection? We need. If we want to be senior, we should be treated as a senior and not in the IBC treated as pari passu with others. So I think these are challenges: RERA timelines, litigations, vendors payments in the past. Everything has to be looked into. I think I can't put say these three things are a priority. Everything is critical.
Got it. Sharad, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Ramesh. So continuing from what Amit is saying, now we invest across the life cycle of the project. Till 2 years back, we were focusing largely on land acquisition, but with our new fund that we have raised and that we have raised in last 6 months, we now do construction finance and last mile funding as well. I think when you say distressed real estate, one thing is very clear in our mind that we are not the one who is going to turn around a project. If the large part of the challenge that we see lies with the NBFCs who have given disproportionate money to some of the projects, and some of those projects are not viable with the kind of debt that's been currently run on them. There are challenges also that the existing lender is not able to do the subsequent disbursement for various ecosystem challenges. And some of those transactions we have evaluated very closely. And Ramesh, I have to be very frank here. The kind of effort and the time involved for the number of people involved in the trade, the reward is very limited. If you look at 20-25 transactions, you'll probably end up doing 1 or 2. Just because there are so many people involved, and it takes time. And our experience is that when you start looking at some of these transactions, I'm specifically referring to the transaction where there is an existing lender sitting who is not able to give subsequent money and is reluctant on certain terms. And by that time you reach a middle ground, which takes anything between 4 to 6 months, there are changes in the thought process of various stakeholders. So in our experience, we don't want to be seen as somebody who's coming out bailing out a distressed real estate developer or NBFCs. There are requirements of last mile, which are very large opportunity. But for us, we are looking at standard projects, and that's why we have changed our return expectations as well. We have come off significantly with our new fund, which is mid-teens kind of a return expectation, because we believe the opportunity here is to do regular construction finance. The ecosystem, if you look at the players in the market, you look at banks, NBFCs, PSUs bank, the pie has shrunk. And we like to play more on regular construction finance opportunity rather than turnaround opportunities.
Thanks, Sharad. Irfan, I know your preamble is very different from what Sharad just mentioned. What are your thoughts on that?
So let me tell you the kind of difficulties that we faced, right? And I believe that those difficulties will be similar to that any new entrant in the sector will face in the distressed residential sector. So the first is lenders, right? We insist on getting a senior charge, and lenders are reluctant to cede a senior charge, right? Lenders look at an account and look at a project as a loan account, which is all right as long as the interest is being serviced, as long as the principal is being serviced, and it doesn't matter if there is no construction going on at the site itself, right? We look at it very differently. We look at progress at the site as an indicator of whether the project is stressed or not its loan performance or its account, its performance on the account with the NBFC. Lenders are reluctant to cede charge. Lenders are extremely enthusiastic in getting so many things turned right before they give a NOC to the Swami Fund to do a deal. Lenders are exuberant in their demands for repayments, prepayments, some deposits before they will cede charge. So that's one big difficulty. The other big difficulty we have, and like I said, any other player in this sector will face, is the fact that approvals in a lot of these distressed projects have lapsed. Some of these approvals take a long time to get, right? So even if the intent is to fund, even if the approvals are to fund, you cannot fund these projects for some time, because unless those some very basic approvals, and we are not talking of approvals that are only a mere hygiene, which we help the developer achieve after we invest in the project, right? So those related to maybe governance and all that, but those related to, let's say, environmental, for example, right? If it has expired, there's nothing we can do about it. We have to wait till the developer gets it. So that's the second biggest. And I think the third biggest is, the people we partner with, the home buyers. They can be a big challenge to a project as well, right? Home buyer activism sometimes turns into home buyer vengeance. If the developer is, if there's action taken against the developer, it is very difficult to keep the project remote from the effects of the action taken on the developer. We come in to complete the project, and we need the developer to complete the project. Home buyers, in spite of their enthusiasm and their passion and the fact that their savings are invested, do not have the expertise to complete a residential project. So, taking care of impatient home buyers, forming a partnership with them, talking to them, restraining them, demonstrating progress at the site is something that has taken a significant amount of our time and effort. So, we have to work along with not just lenders and get approvals, but with home buyers as well.
Thanks, Irfan, on that. Ashwinder, your views on that?
Ramesh, your question was regarding, sorry, I got logged out. Your question was regarding the market for distressed residential properties, right?
My question was regarding the challenges today which capital providers face. In your last role, Ashwinder, you are heading Bajaj. And what are the typical challenges which you're facing today as a lender?
See, I would kind of agree partially with Irfan. The issue is a lender is looking at the deal in a silo. And the lender is, a private lender is bothered about lending something where he gets the money back. And to be honest, I see a lot of players who are now saying that we want to be in a standard construction finance industry, because when you are in a standard construction finance industry, coming back, you are taking lesser risk. And obviously, when you are taking lesser risk, your margins have to be lesser. And that's what Sharad kind of was alluding to. But I feel the challenges are because, we have a mismatch in the kind of lender who needs to get into the distressed residential market. You need lazy capital for that. You can't expect an NBFC or a HFC to come in the distressed asset world, because either you are a fund or you have a debt already on your books and you are taking a debt at a higher cost, because the Indian debt market is very fragile. So you definitely need lazy capital, you need government backing to get the distressed residential market up and about. I feel, Ramesh, distressed residential properties, especially in metros, have to be looked as an investment opportunity by patient institutional investors. I'll give you an example. This can be thought on the lines of what Innovation Homes did in US. What large number of properties, improved them, and then rented them out. And with the new rental model code coming in, if you get a lazy capital, a large fund for the next 10 years who can build these properties, take over these properties, convert them into yield assets, because see, in residential, India doesn't have a yielding asset. So the moment you are able to bring about some structural innovation in the market and get in foreign capital, which is a long-term capital, and completely change the fundamental of that asset class by not selling it outright and making it a yielding asset, many things can be done, because there is a huge demand for homes. Let us understand, there is a huge demand for homes, but one Swami fund, is not enough. You need multiple Swami funds, and you need a Swami fund, in every city. That's because every city is like a country if you compare it with Europe. Or you completely look at it from a different perspective, and you get government to get into it from a long-term perspective and do a PPP, a public-private partnership, get on to those assets from a longer-term perspective, build them, and then rent it out, and maybe over a period of time get into an LRD kind of a situation. But I think the opportunity is there. It has been done in the US by Innovation Homes very successfully.
Thanks, Ashwinder. Amit, Goenka, let me start the next question with you. Swami's done a fantastic job. You've seen Irfan's post, so many developments. They've funded now, start projects. What is the ask of typical capital providers today from the government? If you were to advise the government today, so that there are so many people on this panel itself, Amit Bhagat, Sharad, all of them have capital. What is required from the government side so that we have more Swamis and Sharad and Amit behaving like a Swami in the future?
I think that's a wonderful question, Ramesh, and something which we have been trying to address for the last couple of years, amongst various AI funds for sure. First is, let's look at the supply of stressed assets. That itself is where the bottleneck lies. For example, AI funds, which is really what most of us are not allowed to buy bank loans because we can only issue security. So we've been saying, well, why do we need to be an ARC when if you can allow AIFs to also effectively act like securitization trusts and be able to acquire assets from banks? I think that's therefore one of the constraints, that we're not able to take over a large part of the stuck and stressed assets from the financial services and from the banking industry only because of regulatory reasons. The second, when it comes to the regulatory and protective regime, now clearly Swami has been given a sovereign protection when it comes to insolvency and bankruptcy code and resolving assets under that, wherein if they have invested, they will clearly have the ability to continue to act as senior lenders throughout the life of the investment, a protection that is not available to everybody. That obviously sort of tilts the scales against everybody else. Of course, it's a very, very important legislation, and it must be mandatorily be applicable to all for looking at stressed assets, that once you have invested, you must have regulatory protection so that your capital then cannot be at risk, because it is intended to rescue these stressed assets and to be able to provide homes for those who have been stuck for several years, and effectively, resolve the economy as a whole. So I think that's the second ask. Third, there are several costs, charges, and dues which suddenly start precipitating from various statutory bodies, whether it was land-related rents, premiums, taxes, and what have you. Something which has been in abeyance for so long suddenly starts to precipitate. So there has to be a back-ending or a mega relief provided, as far as, because clearly statutory dues are on the top of the table. Government dues sit above all of us. So they have to be back-ended, they have to be reduced. There has to be relief provided, and there must be a certain amount of impetus to ensure that the money is used in the nature of a social impact, to be able to first complete it and then a waterfall decided. Otherwise, again, that start-stop nature or finding new money to fund old money becomes a constant problem. Of course, Irfan has already described the problem that one faces with home buyers, from being enthusiastic to being litigant to actually being very, very volatile. And so, while the IBC has allowed home buyers to become a significant part of the committee of creditors by making them financial creditors, there is no modus operandi in place as to how this business has to be run. So while we have seen IBC included, we have not seen too many successes come out of that regime in terms of resolving of assets. Some have gone to liquidation, some have gone to a resolution plan. Those resolution plans have not been implemented. Supreme Court has had to step in. Very, very erratic. So I think we need to smoothen out and again maybe step back and rethink as to how stressed assets are going to be resolved, because SARFAESI has failed to resolve it. IBC, which was expected to resolve it, is not doing necessarily a great job on the housing side. It may be doing a great job on many, many other assets, but because of the nature and the type of stakeholders, it's more challenging on the IBC regime. Maybe the new ARC or the bad bank, the National Asset Reconstruction, may be an answer, where it can then pull in and then start giving away assets to the right capital providers and AIFs. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, Ramesh. But I think sourcing of assets is a problem, resolving them subsequently is a problem, and all of this requires a more aligned governmental policy. We've seen policies come out for rental housing.
Yeah.
There must be a policy which has to be also instituted for the purpose of stressed assets and impact housing, because capital alone cannot be the solution. There are legal, regulatory, and consumer challenges which also need to be addressed, as there are other challenges at the state and federal level.
Well summarized, Amit. Sharad, what are your thoughts? You want to add something to?
Yeah, so I think Amit has summarized it quite well. I would add two things, because we raise domestic money, and one of the key challenge when I hear from, say, developer on some of the other, earlier discussion that I heard, that the cost is very expensive, but that's how the ecosystem is built. One of the things that can help reduce the cost is, and we can look at for a limited period, I'm saying government can look it for a limited period, and we are in a special situation. The kind of benefits which have been given to Swami Fund, some of it is, if they are built into a regular AIF, which are trying to do a similar kind of thing. One is the Amit has highlighted that the protection under IBC, that the structure should not fall off if the project goes to the IBC. I think that something should be done. But two additional things I would suggest, which should be done within the AIF regulations. One, I think the tax is exorbitant. When we raise local money, and if the money goes back in form of, say, a large part goes as interest and some bit goes as capital gain, it is exorbitant. The blended rate is an upward of 30%. So if you look at a gross return and 30-35% get shaved off as tax, is one big limitation. If there's something can be done around that for a limited period with a specific objective of money going into a certain set of projects, to make it attractive. The second is if some bit of financial engineering is allowed in the AIFs, which are doing a specific job. What do I mean by that? Is a leverage. Excessive leverage is bad, but the optimum leverage, say 1:4 is the optimum leverage. It also helps for us to do transactions at a lower cost, and that would eventually help the real estate sector. So I would say these two things. And of course, one thing that we've been pushing for is that the structure should not fall off if I have come in the last, and I should continue to enjoy preference in the cash flow and charge.
Thanks, Sharad. With that, I'll come to the next question. Amit, Bhagat, let me ask you this one. So,
Ramesh, if I could just interrupt you, and my apologies for that.
Please,
let me also share some thoughts here, specifically on whether Swami kind of benefits should be extended to the rest of the industry. So two things, unlike the general perception, unlike the very, very prevalent general perception, right? The fact that we have IBC protection plays a very, very limited role in our credit analysis. Our credit analysis is limited to what the debt is, what the cash flows are, etc., etc. So it is not like, that IBC protection is a magic wand that takes all the deals through the IC, right? So that's one. We rarely, if ever, discuss it in the IC. Our bigger challenge is to get senior credit status on a contractual basis from the existing lenders. It is not about IBC protection. So that's one. Second, it's also a question of risk versus return, right? If you have the perception that IBC protection dramatically reduces the risk, right? The return is the other side of the coin, right? That should vary according to it. And therefore, this government fund that has come in, the Swami Fund, while it does have IBC protection, it also charges 12% completely back-ended after construction. It does, it does lending across cities, so we are currently present in 32 locations in the country, which is 24 tier 2 cities and 8 metro cities. So, the mandate is, you have to look at the mandate holistically. It is not just a government fund which has come in with sovereign protection. It's also a government fund which is lending at, compare 11.5% or a 12% IRR. And, willing to lend across the country, willing to look at projects and take the risk, right? So I think the entire picture needs to be considered, not just one part
you're saying that because we
it.
charge high cost of capital, we don't deserve any protection.
No, I won't talk about what you deserve or not. I'm part of the industry as much as you are, right? So I will not take the high and mighty stand, but I'll tell you the thought process behind the return that we expect and the risk protection that we have. That's all.
Got it. And that is quite an insight that IBC protection is not really a real impact in your credit analysis. Amit, I'll come back to you, Bhagat. We saw a lot of global foreign money coming into office first. Then we saw it even coming into retail. Now there's so much of capital going towards warehousing. And you and me would have sat in like 10 panels discussing when is real good private equity going to come, global money going to come into residential. We've been talking about it forever. Still nothing much has happened. What needs to be done to get more FDI into residential?
I think the government is doing everything. If you look at GIFT City, withholding tax of 10%, no PAN requirement for investor. That is in place. And so instead of going through various other countries where the withholding tax is 15, now you are at 10%. You have all the advantages. They have also allowed a Cat 3 to invest in a Cat 2 now. You can raise a fund there and invest in entire money in. There is no direct requirement of direct investment from that particular fund. I think what we need to look at is that it is like any other industry. And I'm digressing a little bit. As industry, you have to see if somebody was over leveraged, over committed, did not deliver to the customer, he has to move out. What we need is insolvency cases should be resolved in 12 months. So there is a certainty that this guy will move out and the other guy will step in. What we need is an inter-creditor agreement to be honored. Not an insolvency protection, but an inter-creditor agreement between two lenders to be honored, where if I have a preference, I have a preference. I think these are the only three things required. Somebody who is coming in, if you look at most of the business funds who are trying to enter into the country and buying some portfolios, their return expectation is obnoxious, 23-25%, because they carry a currency risk. So which will continue. Unless and until you have supply of capital and there are recipients of capital who are doing justice to that money, the level will not be found actually. So let's not expect too much from the government. Government has done everything. What we need is an inter-creditor agreement and insolvency cases to be resolved in 12 months. And also this delay in resolution of insolvencies because of the pandemic partly. But when large quantum of money comes in with a development risk in the residential space, they will expect these two things. Other than that, I don't think government has to do anything. Somebody is overleveraged. It happens in every industry, steel industry, consumer durables. Somebody is over leveraged, over committed, was not customer centric. Why do we want to protect the developers? Or so developers have a different demand. They want restructuring. We don't want that. We are saying just ensure 12 months insolvency. That's it.
Yeah, I just want to, add a couple of things. Most of it is covered, but I feel the perception of the Indian residential sector is that we are an unorganized sector, unlike office, for example. So it is not about the technical stuff that the government has done, because life is all about marketing and positioning, because if positioning was not important, it wouldn't have been the most important subject in all our MBA courses. So I think doing technical stuff and not articulating and communicating properly, the residential sector is never going to get the foreign money, because our positioning is very weak. We are considered very unorganized. There are few and far large players who you can count on your fingers, maybe 10, 12 in India, who are established. The rest, according to the foreign definition, are very, very small. And there are a lot of retrospective things that happen in the country which have happened in the past. And that is why when a sector is perceived as unorganized and it is B2C and not B2B, and the Indian consumer in itself is a very unpredictable species, you are not going to get foreign money coming in, because it's very clear the government, according to me, has not done enough on, doing some technical stuff doesn't help, because, finally, it is also the enforcement of the law and not just the law. So India suffers from the law enforcement rather than the law itself, and the positioning of the sector that the government is really interested in building the residential sector. See, two things that they were not able to do. The smart city has become a dream. We still don't see what was told about the smart city, and it was going to be a great thing in the last 5-6 years. Nothing substantial has happened on the smart city front. If there would have been progress, the foreign players would have jumped to this opportunity. Because I think if there are returns are always expected higher in a B2C business than a B2B business, because the risk and reward is kind of constructed like that. So the government needs to work a lot on the smart city project, on organizing the residential sector, on making the perception of the Indian residential sector as robust as the commercial sector. And we will see, office has gone completely other way around. The largest owners of office space are foreign players, which is also not that great. But because it was the easiest pick for the foreign players, Ramesh, and you understand that better than anybody else on the panel.
Thanks, Ashwinder. Sapna, do we have some time for some audience questions?
Yes, we can take some questions. We have one question here. Let me just. But before that, if you can sum up our, what our speakers have mentioned for our, viewers, and then I can bring in the questions.
Before I kind of sum up, I was looking at some of the global data. And the interesting fact there, when you look at RCA's global capital flows data, is a lot of money is going into what they call beds and sheds, which is residential and warehousing. So globally, when you looked at like last year, hotels, the overall capital flows reduced by nearly 70%, obviously for obvious reasons. Office reduced by around 35%. But in warehousing, the total capital flow last year reduced only by around 7% and residential by only around 15%. So residential globally is suddenly being seen as a preferred asset class. And across the world, it's picking up. I know there are some funds who are at early stages of looking at residential in the country. So that's something to at least to cheer about from a global point of view. But like what Amit and Ashwinder said, lots to be done. So I asked 3-4 questions. So the first question on second wave, the panelists felt that increased delight for the larger players, increased flight for the smaller players. Irfan mentioned that market is getting all the more segmented, more consolidation happening. He spoke about how labor cost increase, all this is breaking the back of smaller developers. Amit spoke about how Bangalore was starting to revive, how Mumbai was starting to revive, and then Delhi was starting to revive. But overall, the debt and interest rates have killed that. He also spoke about how steel, cement, labor all have increased. Collections have also kind of increased. He spoke about how to look at the listed players who come out with the data. Again, everyone is struggling on the collections part. Sharad spoke about how an overnight turnaround is just not possible. We all keep seeing in many of these panels. I remember once Srini of Kotak joking that every time in a panel we keep saying in 12 months it's going to recover. And he's been seeing that for the last 10 years. This time Sharad said it's going to take at least 2 to 4 years for the recovery to happen. And interest rates, he said, is going to have the biggest weightage for this recovery. That's like a 50% weightage is what he gave. He said large developers, the top 30% of the market is doing reasonably well, and he felt consolidation will accelerate further. Again, Amit felt Bangalore, Mumbai, Pune were doing reasonably well. Ashwinder said this, financiers who didn't fund at the last stage, the land stage, are still doing well. And reference sales and direct sales have increased is what Ashwinder again felt. Amit Goenka felt that the second wave, the government didn't intervene. That's definitely having an impact on the market. Something was expected from the government, but the kind of incentives or the intervention they did in the first wave wasn't seen. But he also felt that there's new capital formation which is happening. In terms of challenges which capital providers look at while evaluating projects, I thought Amit Bhagat summarized it very well. He said credibility, intent, track record, and capability to execute is key. He looks at growth corridors before giving money. Then he starts looking at the numbers. The main focus is on attempting to do the financial closure. RERA and customer complaints is something they've actively started looking at if the asset is kept in a separate SPV. And because you don't want to get into any IBC mess. So those are things Amit looks at. Sharad said time and effort required to rescue a distressed project where an NBFC is funded is just not worth the trouble. He said after looking at 25 projects, maybe he funds 1 or 2 projects. That's not good news for the audience who's kind of watching this. Irfan said he looks at the progress of site more than anything else. Approval lapse is becoming a big challenge with some of these projects getting again into approval stage. Home buyers activism turning to home buyer vengeance. I've seen this across the country. This is something that there are those society office bearers who are listening to this call. Nobody is going to benefit when that home buyer vengeance starts. We again saw this in 2007-8. We saw this in 2000. 96, 97, again, this was there. Whenever there is these cases, nobody benefits. Ashwinder spoke about how patient capital is the need of the hour. He spoke about a company called Innovation Homes. He said it's worth studying there, the case study. What government needs to do, some very good feedback. Amit, you said AIF needs to be allowed to take over loans. Regulatory protection for other funds like the Swami Fund. Statutory charges relief. The government can do something on a one-time basis. Sharad again spoke of some benefits or schemes to be given to other AIF. He said for at least for a certain period. I thought Sharad didn't say give it forever. Give it for a certain period. Domestic money, you need to reduce tax if you need to get in more domestic money. Allow more financial engineering, like the optimum leverage he spoke about 1:4. IBC protection, Irfan said, is not impacting his credit analysis. His credit analysis is more based on what the cash flows of the project are. How do we get in more FDI into residential was my next question. And Amit Bhagat mentioned that similar incentives to GIFT City. He spoke about how insolvency cases to be resolved in 12 months. If you can get that intercreditory agreement to be honored in time, that can be fixed. And Ashwinder again spoke about how this is overall our residential, thanks to some of the mistakes we ourselves made in 2007-8. The perception is that it's a very unorganized sector. That perception has to change. And many large players are required. Today, there is no depth. Ashwinder said there's like just 10, 12, 15 developers today for worth kind of for playing that scale game. And he felt smart city, the overall government hype around smart city is overall a wasted opportunity overall. So
one question we have is that they say we are seeing an era of specialization in real estate, players only in co-working or co-living or data centers. Is there something going to happen in residential segment as well, specialization?
Yeah, I think I can take it. See, that is already happening. There are players who are in the residential space, and commercial being built to lease, very capital intensive, is no more any domestic players game. It is already dominated by all large buyout and very large funds, and especially sovereign funds also. In warehouse, there are special experts who have come in. That will always be the game.
Right.
But having said that, private equity will also be an opportunistic space. So wherever the large players are not willing to take a construction risk, the other players, if they are opportunistic, can fill in. But it is definitely a game of specialization only. Even if you go to a sector agnostic PE, you have different experts there for consumer durables, for everything. I think that is already happening and will continue to further consolidate in that direction.
Breaking it further down within residential, will it be developers only in luxury, developers only in mid-income, or only affordable? Is that going to break down even further?
It may happen, but the scale has to pick up for luxury. The scale is so minimalistic that nobody wants to go in that space, and everyone is focused on mid-income and affordable housing.
Sapna, I'll just add a couple of lines here. I think a classic case here is of DLF. There was a time I remember in 2007, 6-7, when DLF was looking at an expansion into 50 cities. They were looking at hotels. They were looking at, I think DRHP said they were looking at 20,000 rooms hotels. They were looking at IT parks, retail malls, all that. But today you look at DLF's strategy. In residential, they want to play only in one market, which is their core market, Gurgaon NCR. Commercial, they've identified like 4 markets. I think that specialization is bound to happen. You look at the best office players in the country today, people like Embassy, RMZ, all of them played just one big asset class and did really, really well in that. So I think it's a matter of time before specialization happens. Look at Godrej Properties. They don't do office. They are fully focused on residential. So I think that specialization is just a matter of time. You just cannot be the best. You look at the big developers who got into trouble in both 97, 98 and 2007 and 8. The biggest reason they got into trouble was they tried venturing out into multiple cities and venturing out into multiple asset classes. Everybody wanted to become the best in 5-star hotels. I want to have 3 5-star hotels. I want to have 3 malls. I want to have 10 residential, 5 office. Those are the people who got into trouble. Look at the names. I don't want to mention those names here, but you look at take the top 5 and look at them. That's exactly what they did, and that's where they failed. So very, very good question.
Yeah, okay.
If I can just add to that,
not only in segment but also region-wise also. Yeah, Mr. Irfan.
Just add to that, the feeling among investors is they will do their own diversification, right? They choose a developer or they choose a private equity fund for a particular asset class, and then based on their own risk return profile, they'll allocate assets amongst different asset classes, even within real estate and across real estate. So they would rather keep that decision to themselves rather than leave it to the underlying developer. And that's where the whole story of specialization comes in.
Okay, fantastic. So not only from the developers' point of view, but also investors' point of view, specialization is the way forward. And I think that was one very exciting conversation, because residential is close to everyone's heart. So, thanks, Mr. Ramesh Nair, for wonderfully moderating that. I actually had 2-3 more questions, but we have to move into the next session. But thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your views and that your opinions. Most importantly, what should be the way forward? How we should work out various challenges that, again, a lot of our speakers mentioned the challenges as well. So thanks, Mr. Amit Bakat, Mr. Amit Goenka, Irfan Kazi, and Mr. Sharad Mittal and Ashwinder Singh, and Ramesh Nair, as always, for that wonderful moderation and conducting of that panel. Thank you so much.